I Am Greta, documentary feature about, you guessed it, Greta Thunberg, the teenage climate activist from Sweden. It was released on Hulu a couple of months ago, I think already last year, and now had a theatrical release in Poland, so I went to check it out. The camera follows Greta from the first days of her student strike in Sweden at the Swedish parliament, all the way back in 2018, to the famous boat trip that she went on to get to New York without having to travel by plane as a sort of political statement, which happened in 2019. All in all, around 2 years' time, mostly the public stuff, recordings from the protests and speeches and meetings with people, plus a little bit of footage from behind the scenes from Greta's personal life, although not much. Understandably so, because she is a teenager, so having a camera follow you around all the time would probably be very invasive and detrimental. Here's my problem with the film. I don't know who it was made for. The way I see it, we all know who Greta is by now. I don't think there's anybody who hasn't heard about her. And since the topic of climate crisis seems to be very polarizing, I would expect that there are either people who are already on board and agree with what Greta's talking about, or people who get annoyed by her and don't believe that the climate crisis is man-made or that we can do something about it. So the first group of people won't really learn much new from the documentary, because as I said, most of the footage is collected recordings from the already public stuff. There is very little new information. And on the other hand, the movie will certainly not convince any naysayers to change their position, mainly because it is focused on Greta as a person instead of the science behind what she's talking about. And interestingly, there is even one scene in the film where Greta is reading some critical comments on the internet about herself, and one person says that all she does is say that we need to do something, but she doesn't offer specific, reliable solutions. And as much as that may not be true if you actually dive into the sources that Greta herself usually provides, that's not in the film itself. So the movie actually ends up being guilty of that very thing. It doesn't tell its viewers what they can do for the planet, apart from organizing school protests. Now, I kind of understand that this was the idea of the film, not to go deep into the science, but rather portray Greta as a person, try to explain who she is, what she's doing, why she's doing it, but the argument still stands. And I also think that the film is kind of uneven. There are some really great moments in it, like when Greta has a speech in front of politicians, including Jean-Claude Juncker, and then he proceeds, he sort of follows it up by a speech that seems to be going somewhere and ends up being completely unrelated and like disregarding her arguments completely in a bizarre way. And there's this great moment because she's listening to the translator on the headphones, and she just takes it off with this funny look on her face, darkly funny, but yeah. Or there's that whole section filmed on the boat on the Atlantic Ocean, which really shows how big a toll this is taking on Greta herself. I mean, something like that would take a toll on an adult person, but she's just a teenager, so probably even more so. But there are also sections which are kind of boring and made me check out mentally. I think in general there is a lack of stronger narrative tissue which would sort of pull the film together and pull the audience into it. Also, the ending is really jarring because it has this hopeful music playing and massive footage of massive protests happening, and it seems like, you know, if you just saw that scene, you would think, oh, so we've won, we've solved the climate crisis. But then the text explains how basically nothing substantial is still happening in terms of legislation around climate change. So that's a very weird tonal mismatch. Now, let me be clear. I'm with Greta here. I think she is correct in panicking about the future, and I agree we need to be doing stuff quickly. I'm not a hater here, but I do have to say, as a film, I Am Greta is very underwhelming, and I don't think it can do much to push these topics. I think it may be interesting to see as a historical recording of what was going on in 20, 30 years, you know, in the future, if we're still around by that time. But for now, it just seems like a fairly average collection of speech clips, mostly.